Genesis chapter 9, be reading from verses 1 to 17. Hear the word of the Lord. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your life blood I will require reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth and multiply in it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the livestock and every beast of the earth with you, as many as come out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. God said to Noah, This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. May the Lord add his blessings to the reading of his holy word. Well, what's valuable to you? What are the things or the people or experiences that mean the most to you? You know we'll be able to see it. It's what you give the most time, most interest, most attention, most money to, what you're willing to sacrifice for. You know, we like to be shown practically that we're valuable. I once received a performance review on a job, which is very positive. The boss had all kinds of good things to say about me, and then the boss ended by asking me, do I have anything to say? You have anything to say? And I said, yes, I'd like a raise. If I'm doing such a good job like you say I am, I want you to show it. I want a sign that these aren't just words and in the form of money. And he said, oh yeah, that's the next thing. You're getting a raise. Hospitality businesses like hotels and restaurants know if they can show you that they value you, that they consider you dignified and important, then you are more likely to return. A waitress soon learned that the more she can show her customers that she really values them, that she's paying attention to them, she's refilling their drinks and so forth, well, then the bigger tips she'll get. Good hotels have concierges whose job it is simply to serve the guest needs. And like that, seeker-sensitive churches are geared to make you feel valued. They put on a good show and they talk about topics you're interested in. They probably have someone greet you at the door, maybe ask if you're a visitor, particularly to escort you right to your seat and this kind of thing. They play music that fits your taste, and they dress and they talk like you. The only problem is often, in such cases, it's only about you and often not about God. Well, many people say that God or the Bible is valuable to them, but if you really show it, one of the weird things I've seen over the last 14 years when we started this church is the number of people outside the church who say they want a reformed or a healthy or a biblical church, whatever you want to call it, expository preaching, a true church family, and they know we are that, who say they support us. They will even recommend us to other people. But they don't support us by joining. What they say they value and what their life shows they value are two different things. If the concierge or the waitress told me with great passion how much he or she valued me, I'm here to serve you, and whatever you want, I'll do for you. Well, that may sound good to begin with, but if I asked, I need a toothbrush, and they didn't bring it, or I want a refill of my water, and it didn't come, Well, I won't be impressed then. Some Americans put great emphasis on family members always saying, I love you, often, begin and end every phone conversation with that kind of thing. I love you, but I'm much more impressed by seeing love, seeing being valued, practically, demonstrated in actions. We all value being valued. We love being loved. We want to be treated with dignity, like our time, our needs, our desires, our feelings, our ideas, our comfort are worth looking after. Now, sure, after the fall, that can be seen here already in Genesis, that inclination can soon degenerate into arrogance, into narcissism, into egomania, the feeling that I am God and everyone should serve me. But it would not be right to overreact to our sinful inclination by saying that we are valueless. We may have grievously fallen. Every inclination of our hearts is only evil all the time from youth. But we're not worthless. We're still made, as chapter 9 here shows us, in the image of God. This passage shows us that God values us, that He loves all life, especially our lives, human lives, and He shows that in practical ways, things we can see. He shows that here in 3 commands. First, to increase life. Second, to inflict death. And finally, to inherit the promise. First, increase. God tells us to increase, in other words, make more life. He blesses us and He makes most of us able to have children. And He repeats that command from chapter 1, right after the creation. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth. Increase. We could get the impression from the flood story that God doesn't really like life particularly. He prefers everything to be washed and clean, sterile. But He would rather have the mess of life than the sterility of a freshly washed land. God values life. So should we. The kids who come here later today will leave a mess. But better the mess of life than the cleanliness of sterility. Our commission is to increase. And He shows in 3 ways. First, fruitfulness. Second, dominion. And third, in values, or the order or the hierarchy of different kinds of life. We increase by being fruitful. God twice tells Noah and his family to be fruitful and multiply. Notice He repeats that. When He repeats something, it's not because He forgot He said it just before. It's for emphasis. Pay attention to this. Be fruitful and multiply. God wants life to flourish, whether literal, physical, especially human life, or spiritual life. That's why the commission here is to multiply and fill the earth, and the Great Commission and the New Testament is to preach the gospel so God can increase spiritual life through it. This command comes right after the flood, so we don't get the impression, after God has just killed so many people and animals, that God's sterile, He's cold and dead. Here we see that He wants fruitfulness. And verse 7, God again repeats the command to increase, says it another way, be fruitful and multiply, and adds teem, T-E-E-M, like what the animals were doing in chapter 1, remember that? They were teeming, all the animals, the fish, the birds, they were teeming. Now, people are supposed to teem on the earth. Now, there's an ideology now that hates human life. It thinks it can be sacrificed before birth, for our convenience, or at a very old age, also for our convenience. It can be reduced, population control, so we can have more stuff. That's what it's all about. So we can have more stuff, more pleasure, more leisure. We don't have these other annoying people around us to get in our way. It's all about me. It's the culture of death. One politician just last week complained that the reason we're noticing inflation is that we have children. Think of that. If it wasn't for these horrible children that you were having, you wouldn't notice you wouldn't notice prices are going up because you wouldn't be having to buy so much stuff for them. Well, we're to live the suggestion is we're to live for our indulgence, for ourselves, not for life, they say. Cultures grasped by that idea have been suffering population decline. And here the Lord reissues His command to multiply. God is pro-life. Second, dominion. God also renews our dominion over the earth. At creation, we were given dominion, the right to rule over the creatures under God. Here, that dominion is demonstrated. You can see it, but it's demonstrated in a somewhat sad way. In verse 2, the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast. Animals now, generally, unless we domesticate them somehow, have a fear, a distrust of humanity instilled in them. Birds and deer and rabbits, they flee from us. There's an alienation between God's creatures. Even the few creatures that don't have that innate fear of us, I mean, we've domesticated it out of them like cows and chickens. They would have it if they only knew what we were going to eventually do to them. But even cows left to themselves don't know what to do with people. They can be scared by them. Once I was running down Slade Road. First time I ran down there, and there's this herd of cattle just grazing. I guess no one has ever run down there before, I guess, because the cows had never seen it. And they were startled by me. And I'm running down. So they started stampeding away, kind of parallel to me, but on the other side of this barbed wire fence. And then they come to a turn as they're running away from me, frightened by me. I mean, each one of these cows is probably several times larger than I am. But anyway, they're scared by me as I'm running down the road. And then they come to the turn, the corner in their pen, whatever their field they're in. And there's barbed wire there. And they all turn away. But one cow apparently didn't see the barbed wire and just burst right through it and kept running. And then the cow meandered right in front of me. And so here we are, we're running down this road, and this cow is right in front of me, scared to death that I'm chasing it. And what am I going to do? So I crossed the road, and then I sped up, so I'm in front of the cow, and then the cow can see me, and it stops. And I hope the poor thing got back to its field. But there was a fear and a dread of me, even though the thing was much larger than me. I mean, it could have hurt me if it was scary. But that's the condition of animals now. But in verse 3, God says, speaking of animals, like cows, what's the cow there for? Everything that moves, including that cow running down Slade Road, as food for you. So we don't have to be vegetarians. We are given meat to eat, just like vegetables. As I have given you the green plants, you did that earlier, remember in chapter, was it 1 or 2? I give you everything. There is no spiritual or moral reason for claiming that we should only eat vegetables and fruits. Maybe there's for people for health reasons. You're free to be a vegetarian if you like, but vegetarianism, the ideology that says it's immoral to eat animals, is not biblical. We can eat animals, but even when we do that, we should show here practically some value for the life of animals. In verse 4, you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is its blood in it. And then in verse 5, it says there's a reckoning for this life. In other words, this life is worth something. You don't just kill it for no reason. If you can eat it, yeah, you can eat it. But you pay attention to the life of this thing. It's worth something. Notice the blood is equated in verse 4 with life. We can have their meat if we honor their life. The blood is a symbol for their life. Here, in this chapter in the Old Testament, they're not to eat or to drink that blood. So imagine the shock when the Lord Jesus said in John chapter 6 verse 53 that we must drink his blood. Blood is the symbol for the life of the source of the blood. Abel's blood cried out for justice. His life still spoke. Jesus' blood says something better, and we must take that blood, that life, his life, into ourselves. Spiritually. It's the spirit that gives life. The flesh is of no help at all. Jesus also said, in fact, he said almost immediately after he said, drink my blood. Third, values. We understand different values that God has put on different kinds of life. The hierarchy of values. Almost not all animal life is the same. There's different ranks in there. In Hinduism or Buddhism, cattle is as valued as human beings, at least virtually, whether theoretically they admit that, but practically it is. We value animal life, but we value animal life less than that of humans. This, our culture is forgetting as it gets further and further away from a biblical influences, from a biblical worldview. You begin to get confused. You think animals are worth just as much as people. For example, a woman named Karen Davis is the head of an organization called United Poultry Concerns. She's the author of such books as The Holocaust and The Handmaid's Tale. And the Holocaust, they're referring to the slaughter of chickens. She insists that the lives of chickens and other poultry are just as valuable as human lives. She called Colonel Sanders a mass murderer for creating a company that's responsible for killing millions of chickens. Now she is confused. Without the light of God's word, though, that's just the kind of confusion that we can expect to abound in our culture. And here we're shown the higher value of human life. All life is of value. Human life is the most value, at least among creatures. We increase human life by putting it above animal life. And one way we do that is by eating the animals. Colonel Sanders has done chickens a favor. What greater honor could a chicken have than being eaten by someone made in the image of God? What greater end is there for a chicken than that? I mean, it's going to be eaten by something anyway, in the end. You realize that. A wolf or a dog or a turkey vultures or something. Might as well be eaten by someone made in the image of God. That's the best end the thing could ever have, right? So that, anyway, here it quite emphatically says that all animals are given for our food. And that includes, it's interesting because this is in the Old Testament, this is in the law, the Torah, before, all the dietary laws and restrictions. And so that includes not only chicken or beef, but also things like pork and oysters and shrimp, which were later declared unclean in the dietary laws of Moses. Now such laws, because some people are still trying to say we're bound by those laws, but here we see, even in the Old Testament, that such laws were temporary. They were for the Israelites to show the importance to the Israelites of being a people set apart, of glorifying God in everything we do, including eating and drinking. But here we see that such was not God's original plan, not his eternal plan, that there was nothing necessarily defiling about eating pork or oysters. Nothing. So you're free to have it. But far above animal life is our human lives. In verse 5, for your lifeblood, you people, I will require a reckoning. That's God speaking. You are responsible for what you kill. If the animals, you should show them some respect for it. It should be for a reason. The price for killing people, that's a very serious matter. It's a price for killing people because we are made in the image of God in verse 6. So second, we practically show the value we put on human life by what we, not ironically, inflict. We increase life and we inflict death. We inflict a punishment for not valuing life. The penalty for violating human life must fit the crime. Remember that from Cain to the flood, we were told this several times, just in the first 8 chapters, I guess, of Genesis. One of the major problems with that society was violence. Cain killed his brother. And his Lamech, soon a couple of generations after, killed somebody. And they boasted of it. And there was just a spiraling out of control violence. Lives were being taken and no price was being inflicted. And that violence just spiraled out of control. And so God now shows that his love for us by instituting some form of the judicial system. Here God deputizes us. In other words, he gives us some of his authority to do what is his right, but now he's given it to us, to inflict punishments that will protect life. And that's what governments are for. Here God himself says in verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. And notice we are to do it. By man means that we now have the responsibility to inflict the punishment. The Lord is instituting a punishment that demonstrates the value of human life. And that punishment is death. But people in our culture have a very difficult time understanding this. The assumption in our day is there needn't be or there shouldn't be any consequences for many crimes. For many, there's this sentiment in our culture that punishment, except in extreme cases, is usually a bad thing. If you're wise, you can find some way around punishing. It shows, I think, a lack, they think, punishment does. They think it shows a lack of caring. It shows a lack of valuing other people. If we loved more, they say, we'd be more indulgent. And so we wouldn't discipline. Certainly not corporal or capital punishment. Now the truth is that we promote and we protect what we value. We show what we value by what we do. We value animal life to some degree. Here, in this case, by not eating blood. We value human life by not spilling the blood in the first place. God himself tells us to even be willing to inflict a punishment for violating that which is valuable. Inflicting the death penalty is a way of honoring human life. Now, I know that sounds absurd to some people. In fact, I remember once hearing the BBC just kind of mocking that. Some American politicians said that we honor life by inflicting the death penalty on murderers. And they just found that just ridiculous. That to say that inflicting death is a way of valuing life. But we value human life by inflicting a penalty that will help stop it being devalued. That's what God is saying here. And while he is saying that, he is instilling two bigger principles that are important for understanding ourselves before God. First, the duration of human life, and second, the valuation of a life. First, duration. Now think about it. God here calls a murder to be repaid by taking the murderer's life. Now why? Is it just to be a deterrent? Is it just a way to terrorize would-be murderers from killing? Or is there something more to it than that? It can be that and something more. In Genesis 4, Abel's blood still speaks. That is his life. Remember, the blood is the life. His life himself still speaks even after he's dead. He may be dead, but he's not gone. Remember that blood is the symbol for life. In verse 6, whoever pours out a life from a person, from his body, separating the soul from the body, should have his life also poured out. In other words, God is calling for the life of the murderer because the person he or she murdered is still before God. It's not gone. Gone from us, maybe, but not from him. The victim is neither out of sight nor out of mind as far as God is concerned. Here's one of the first clues in the Bible that the duration of our lives is beyond the duration of our mortal bodies. Second, the eternal duration of our lives shows us the valuation we put on human lives. We already said that all life is valuable, but some lives are more valuable than others. Animal life is not as valuable as human life. Now, some people would apply that to humans. To some people's lives are more valuable than others. Some races are less valuable. Some are more, or they have more money, or their power, or they have more value. What is a human life worth? The passage gives us the equation for the valuation of human lives. One against another. What does one life against another compare? Well, does it depend on race? Does it depend on the power, the money they have, their status, their sex? What is it? Does it depend on anything? Well, that equation is simple. Here, it's 1 for 1. 1 equals 1. One person's life equals another. So all people are equally valuable. Destroying any kind of racism or anything that would say that some are less than others. It says that whoever sheds the blood of man, any person, of any race or nation or sex or age, no matter how much wealth or power that person has or has none at all. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. He shall have the punishment inflicted so as to show, the way you can see, show the value of every person made in God's image. This is how much destroying someone created in God's image cost. In other words, the punishment must fit the crime. Now, once we've learned this equation for evaluation, which is 1 equals 1. Kind of simple, isn't it? Whereas for animals, it's different. They're not as equal to us. Once we learn this equation, we can apply it to other crimes. We've seen that even the animals have some dignity, that we should honor their lives, even if we do eat them. Humanity has the most value, the most dignity of any earthly creature because we are made in God's image. The equation of valuation then is that the punishment fits the dignity or the value of the one being violated. Now, if you see a cockroach scurrying around here and you step on it, and please do if you get the chance, there is no penalty because those disgusting creatures, that may be the exception. They may have no value, no dignity that I can see. They probably have negative dignity, at least as far as I think. They're probably stowaways on the ark. But if you killed a dog unjustly for no reason, you could be required to pay the owner for the life of the dog. Perhaps pay an additional fine too. Maybe in some places even jail for a while. Dogs have some value, some dignity that their lives deserve. Not nearly as much as humans, but some. If you murder a human person, then the way you make that right before God is to pay with your life. All human beings are made in the image of God and so are of equal value. The punishment is equal to the value of the victim. And so you take that principle, punishment inflicted matches the dignity of the victim, take it one step further. Remember, human life is not the ultimate value. Why is it worth the life of another? There's a reason for that, and it's given there because people are made in the image of God. Human life derives its value from being made in the image of God. Chickens can't say that. Dogs can't say that. Only human beings are made in the image of God in verse 6. And man is not the measure of all things. Human life is not the highest. It's not the most valuable, not the most dignified thing in the universe. God is the standard. God is the ultimate value. Our value is derived from Him, being made in His image. Now think about that light in the principle of the punishment we've just seen. The just punishment for violating the dignity of someone depends on the value of the one we violated. We violated a human being made in the image of God, equal to ourselves. We should pay an equal price. And what can we do then when we violate God's glory? The divine dignity. Now that is infinite. And we violate His glory. We offend the divine dignity every time we sin. In sin, no matter how small we might think it is, we say that God is not valuable. That our desires to do this or that, whatever it is, against his command, those desires, they are more valuable. They're worth more with saying when we sin. They're more valuable than God's will. More valuable than God. So when we sin against another person, you can make that up by apologizing, making recompense, restitution of some kind. If we murder, we have a life to give in exchange. Those are limited debts that we can pay. But when we sin against God, when we even try to murder God by hanging him on a cross, how can that be made up? That's an infinite debt. Even if we could live as long as Noah, 950 years, make sacrifices, live the rest of our lives sinless, moral, we still couldn't lessen one bit of our infinite debt. This is why you can be moral, you can be decent, you can be religious, a great neighbor. But if your infinite debt hasn't been paid, you still owe an infinite price. So if we're proud, we refuse to bow the knee to Jesus, if we just will not believe him, and otherwise maybe we live decent lives, we're nice to people, but we just don't love the Lord. You'll not sincerely worship him, then we have violated his glory. We have offended his dignity, his value, and so committed an infinite crime. And the only right punishment for that is an infinite punishment. When we violate his dignity, when we offend his glory, that is limitless. And the only way we can pay for that is by suffering an infinite penalty, by being punished forever, without end, without any limit to its severity or duration. So what we see here is the principle behind hell. The punishment must fit the crime. Our crimes are infinite. And so we must have a punishment inflicted on us that is infinite. And that is the final conclusion from that command to inflict that we see here leads us to. And that would only be gloom and despair, if not for what also comes here. There's the command to increase, to inflict, and finally, third, to inherit. Now, if you're one of God's people, like Noah here, you inherit his covenant. God sets up a covenant with Noah. It's not some reciprocal contract. Noah, if you do this, I'll do something back for you, that God will uphold if we just keep our end of the bargain. This is a unilateral covenant made by God, not in any way dependent on human behavior. We just inherit it. Covenants come with signs. In other words, you can see them. Like good service at a restaurant, you can, there it is. It's obvious. You can see it. Here the sign is the rainbow. Or literally here, just the bow. In verse 13, it says, I will set my bow. The Hebrew word there, bow, is the same word, kind of like in English. Rainbow, bow, like for bow and arrow. A bow is a weapon of war. God has just unleashed this weapon of war. It's weapon of mass destruction, which is the flood. Here, in chapter 9, here our warrior God hangs up this particular weapon. He gives us a sign by hanging it in the clouds. Now, of course, we know that rainbows, they have a natural cause, but we can also believe that God in his providence, he arranged nature, he arranged the laws of physics, that there would be this sign of his covenant, and that sign reminds us that God loves life, especially human life. That side shows that the covenant depends totally on God and not on ourselves. If it depended on people, it depended on us keeping the violence and the sin down, and if we don't do it, God says, I'll flood you again. If that was the covenant, well, we'd all probably be thinking, well, we need to build another ark right now. There's probably another flood coming. But it doesn't. It's not something we earn. It's not like a paycheck. It is given to us because of our relationship, like an inheritance. When you see a rainbow, think about what did you do to make that rainbow come about? What did you add to the rainbow? Well, nothing. When it comes to rainbows, we're simply spectators. So the rainbow reminds us that the covenant depends entirely on God's work. The rainbow declares our utter dependence on God. The sign of the rainbow here is not just for us. Look at verses 15 and 16. God says that when He sees the rainbow, He's looking down and He sees it, that He will remember His covenant. It suggests, because God is holy, He is still provoked by our sinfulness. The same provocation the people before the flood were making. But before unleashing a new flood, He sees the sign, the rainbow, that bow of His that He's hung up, put away. He's unleashed it once, but now He's put it away, and He restrains Himself. Now, it's not, of course, that God forgets, but that He has arranged this phenomena of a rainbow to be a reminder that the way He will deal with sin from now on will not be to wipe us all out with a flood. Never again will He obliterate nearly all people. He will save some. It's true that many will finally be judged and condemned, but they will be judged by fire. Some will be saved. God will finally show His value for our lives by saving His people. We're saved not by morality or religion, but simply by inheriting the covenant, by being people who deserve that infinite penalty inflicted on us, but instead had someone else, a person of infinite value, of infinite worth and dignity, a perfect person who had no sins of his own to have to pay for, who because He was infinite and perfect could pay the infinite price that we owed. God has valued His people enough to inflict that penalty on the perfect Son. Having done that for His people, He then promises to increase their lives eternally. All we do is inherit. That's God's value on us, if we're His people. Now, what is your value on God? God has a value that can't be priced, can't be measured, that could not be bought with all the money in the world. It's an infinite worth. When we sin against Him, we violate that dignity. We say He's not worth whatever else it is we're tempted by. So, how are we to pay for it? We can either pay for our sins ourselves and suffer an infinite punishment, facing the infinite wrath of God toward our sin into infinity, or we can accept the sufferings of the infinite God who came in human flesh and died a brutal death on a cross and had that infinite wrath of God toward Him, toward sin, poured out on Him, and His lifeblood was spilled. Jesus paid it all. He made a new covenant, just as God made a covenant with Noah here, just like that rainbow. Just like the rainbow. There is nothing we can add to it. So He set up another covenant with His blood, paying that infinite debt. Just with the rainbow, when it comes to salvation, we're just spectators. He increased, bringing life Himself to earth. He inflicted the punishment on the infinite Son so that we could inherit it. Isn't that the most valuable thing in your life?